Welcome back everyone to our Spitfire build. We start off with the end plates which are made from F2 and F3. You're going to end up with a left and a right side. They've cleverly marked the top with a T, so just bear that in mind. Once that's dry, then you want to pin down the centre section of the fuselage, which is the largest piece in the whole jigsaw. It's K1 situated on sheet 2, although bizarrely it's not actually marked as K1, but you can't really miss it. It is the biggest piece. So pin that in place, then fit the end cap that you've just built and allowed to dry. Fit that onto the front of the fuselage, the left hand piece, and ensure that it's square to the base and the fuselage itself, and then work your way down with the formers from the front to the tip of the plane, and then start to apply your stringers. They're in the main relatively straightforward, but you will find as you're going along that there are some of the stringers that once you've fit them into their appropriate slots, because there's a slight curve towards the nose of the plane, they don't necessarily want to sit down, so you'll either have to hold them in place or find some crafty little method of pinning them in the relevant place whilst the glue dries. I actually just did it by hand, and in all honesty it didn't take more than a minute or two for it to be held tight, so you might come up with something a little more advanced than that, but it worked for me. And then just continue on with all your stringers. Just make sure they're all in the slots, all got a dab of glue. Then when you reach the end of K1, you'll notice that the stringers that sit at the back end there, you'll need to just make a slight beveled edge so that they sit flat against K1, and I pinned it into place with a fairly crude piece of balsa wood that I just pinned down across the top of them. Now F9 is a tricky little fella. You've got to fit this after stringers A and B are in place, but before the top two stringers are fit. Now I'd try a couple of methods without the glue before you go to the final manoeuvre. Little hook nose tweezers seem to help most here, and it is literally just a little fiddly fella, so trial and error perhaps. Then once that's in, then you can proceed to put in your top two stringers. I tried to pop my fat finger in through the bottom gap just to support the tricky fella whilst I was popping the top stringers in place. Once they're all done, drop to the bottom half of the fuselage and continue fitting your stringers. Don't forget to just bevel off the very rear end of the stringers, just so that they'll sit flat against the tail end of the fuselage body. And again, pin it down with a little bit of scrap balsa wood and a couple of pins. Just keep everything in place while it dries. And fit the lowest of the stringers. The only difficulty with those is, of course, because it's all sat on the board, it's difficult to actually see underneath it, what you're doing. And then once that's all dry, we can remove all the retaining pins. trim off where any of the stringers have just overshot the mark. It's not a problem. And then you've got to remove 5 strengtheners that are located on K1. They're strengtheners, that's all. So once it's done, it's marked clearly on the plan, so just make sure you just cut out the right pieces at this stage. You don't want to destroy your fuselage body now. Again, just tickle up any of the stringers that have just gone a little beyond their desired point. And just check it all over, make sure everything looks square. And I thought this might be trickier because obviously this is now, you've got a rounded side which is going to be sat on your work surface, but it didn't turn out to be that difficult. The first part is to fit the second half, the right half of the end plate. Again, make sure that cunning little letter T is at the top. Get that fastened into place and make sure it's all square and dry before we move on. Next, I glued F1 into position. It does actually say in the instructions to wait until the entire fuselage is finished. I don't think it makes a lot. I just thought it might help keep the 2 plates with the 2 halves that were just added to the fuselage. I thought it might hold them in place a little more securely. So either or. When you're adding that top plate, just make sure that the 2 square holes actually line up with each other. And when you're finished, you can just harden up the edges of that square hole with a little bit of super glue. And then, just as we did on the left half, move down the plane with the formers. Again, just making sure they're all as square as possible, parallel to each other. And don't forget, when you get to F9, just to leave the tricky little fella out for a moment or two, as we did on the first side. He'll be getting popped into place once all the stringers are in place, barring for the top 2 stringers. So it's just a repeat of the first side that we did. And once all your formers are in place, then we can glue in the side keel, as it's called, K2, which runs across the middle of the fuselage. And then continue on with your stringers, not forgetting again that the ones that fit at the tail end of the plane need to be just beveled off or tapered, just to form a nice snug fit with the very rear of the fuselage. I don't know why I keep saying fuselage like that. I must think it's French or something, I'm not sure. Anyway, carry on. Once the full length stringers are in place, you'll need to apply one of my patented bits of scrap balsa wood and pin it all down so that they glue nicely. I'm just showing you there where the 2 pieces K4 fit at the very tail of the plane on the top. This is where your actual tail plane is going to sit. So So there's one at either side, and then you can just taper them in so that they follow the form of the rear part of the fuselage. And carry on with the shorter stringers. You might have to apply the little finger clamp trick, unless you came up with something more magical. You'll have to let me know in the comments. I did think about maybe a rubber band, but these stringers are very, very weak sometimes, so I don't want to use an extremely strong band, I don't think. Let me know. You can see better from this angle where there's quite a bend on those stringers there, and they just need a little bit of help to stay in place while the glue dries. I'm not sure why, but I, for some reason, did the bottom of the plane. I put the stringers in at the bottom of the plane right before I did the top ones. It doesn't make any difference, but if it's confusing you a little bit, that's the underside of the plane. Anyway. And now we move to the top end of the plane. And for some reason I didn't show you fitting the little fiddly fella, F9 this time, but we had a good look at him on the opposite side. So it's the same principle. He's a very fiddly little piece, and you do have to be very gentle. One little tip, I did actually break one of them. I'm going to confess, I'm going to come clean. I broke one of the F9 pieces, and it's not the end of the world. You just find a place on one of your sheets of balsa, and just sort of trace round the original F9 that you cut out, and cut yourself another F9. It's not a disaster. And then we fit the two pieces F14, which are essentially cosmetic pieces really. They just finish off the edge of the cockpit. There's one either side. Just lean them in slightly so they follow the form of the rounded fuselage. You can always tickle them up with a little bit of sandpaper once everything's dry. Just make sure they're lent in enough really, just so you don't have to do an awful lot of sandpaper. You don't want to have to remove too much and end up cutting into the fuselage itself. So I didn't show you the second one, but it's an identical procedure. Now what we're fitting is the two pieces F17, which are where the motor peg will slide in. So you've got to be fairly sure this is a good secure piece. So basically, once it's cut from the sheet, just keep tickling it up with a bit of sandpaper till it's just a nice little. Obviously you can't make it too tight or you're going to start snapping your stringers, but they're fairly nice, and I had to push in with a set of tweezers from the far side, just so you could get it pushed in nice and flush to the ribs. And then we just flip the fuselage over and repeat the same, making sure, as I say, that they're a nice snug fit, because there is going to be a bit of force on these pieces, as it's the anchor for the rubber band for the motor. So that's it for the fuselage for now. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please consider a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel, and if you join me for the next one, that will be the nose cone, the nose block and the propeller. And I'll let you in on a little clue, they're all up at the front end, and there is some tricky little pieces to manoeuvre around there. Look forward to you joining me in a week's time. Till then, happy flying and stay safe.